There's something sacred about the first breath you take back on American soil after months of breathing sand, sweat, and tension overseas. The air hits different, like it's heavier with promise. I remember staring out the window of that dusty C-130, watching the tarmac at Fort Carson inch closer, my heart pounding in that weird way it does when you're excited and terrified all at once. I'd counted down the days until this moment. The idea of holding Amanda and Jacob again keeping me sane through gunfire, lost friends, and sleepless nights. I had even rehearsed my return in my head, the look on her face when she saw me a week earlier than scheduled, the way Jacob would drop whatever teenage bravado he'd developed and run into my arms like he did when he was 6. But what I got instead wasn't a homecoming. It was an execution. I should have known something was wrong the second I pulled into the cul-de-sac and didn't feel that snap of recognition you get when your soul says we're safe now. The house, our house, looked almost the same, just with a few unfamiliar touches. A new wreath on the door. Some strange SUV in the driveway. A lawn that didn't look like it had been mowed by the neighbor's kid like I'd paid for. But what really twisted the knife was the moment my key didn't work. I stood there on the porch like a ghost pressing a key into a lock that no longer knew me. Bag still slung over my shoulder, uniform still dusty from the trip, my name still echoing in my ears from the bass loudspeaker. Hold, you're clear. Welcome home. Home. What a joke. The woman who'd promised to keep our life safe while I kept the country safe had sold it right out from under me. And the worst part? I didn't even know where my son was. When the new owner called the cops, I half expected them to recognize me, maybe a local vet returning from overseas, a misunderstanding, a handshake, and an apology. Instead, I got suspicion, cold stares, and a tight voice on the radio confirming that Matthew Holt was not listed as the current homeowner. I watched them walk through what used to be my living room, stepping over memories like they were evidence in a crime scene. One of the officers glanced at my duffel, probably thinking I was homeless or high, and I had to bite down on the rage boiling inside me just to keep from screaming. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a surprise. This was betrayal, planned and executed with precision. And as I stood there, trying to figure out where to go next, I made a promise to myself louder than any battlefield vow I'd ever sworn. Whatever she did to me, she won't get away with it. I didn't cry that night, not because I didn't want to, not because the betrayal didn't tear straight through my chest like a hot round in close combat, but because whatever version of me that still believed in Amanda's love had been executed the moment I saw that "For sale" sign swinging slightly in the wind beside my old mailbox. I spent that first night back in the cab of my truck, slumped beneath the weak glow of a gas station floodlight, gripping a cold bottle of water with the same white-knuckled grip I once used on an M4 overseas. There was a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake, not from fatigue, not from jet lag, but from a question that burrowed deeper with every hour that passed. Where the hell is my son? I hadn't heard from Jacob in weeks, but I chalked it up to spotty overseas Wi-Fi and teenage detachment. Now, in the silence of that parking lot, I started to wonder if the silence had been deliberate, if Amanda had cut me out long before she cut the locks. I drove to the last known address on record for Amanda's sister the next morning, a quiet house on the edge of town that used to smell like cinnamon rolls and sarcasm every Christmas, but when her husband opened the door, the look on his face told me everything I needed to know before I even spoke. He didn't ask how the deployment went. He didn't ask why I was back early. He asked one thing, flat and low. You don't know, do you? Turns out Amanda had withdrawn nearly every cent from our joint account 4 months ago, transferred it to a private one, and cherry on top, she'd refinanced the house behind my back. Using a fake power of attorney document that apparently held just enough water to push the paperwork through while I was buried in some hellhole across the world. She didn't just sell the house. She sold the life we built together, and did it so cleanly that I didn't even know I was homeless until I tried to open the front door. What really gutted me, though, what made my stomach turn and my hands go cold, was when I heard Jacob had stopped showing up to school entirely. Not moved. Not transferred. Just disappeared. Amanda claimed he wasn't doing well emotionally, but the way her sister whispered that phrase made it sound like code for something darker. My son had always been a good kid, not perfect, but solid, and I refused to believe he just walked off the map on his own. Whatever Amanda did, whatever poison she fed him while I was gone, it worked. And for the first time in my life, after 3 tours, 2 injuries, and more funerals than I care to count, I felt truly, completely lost. But loss, I've learned, can either bury you or sharpen you. And I hadn't come this far to be buried. I used to think betrayal was a single moment, A flashpoint, a loud bang, something clean and final. But standing in line at the county clerk's office, flipping through property records and watching the life I built dissolve into a neatly typed stack of PDFs, I realized betrayal is slow and quiet, like a leak behind the walls that rots your foundation while you sleep. It turned out Amanda hadn't just left me, she'd erased me methodically, step by step, like I was a stain she could scrub away with just enough signatures and lies. The clerk, a pale kid who looked like he should still be in high school, handed me a manila folder and offered a weak, apologetic smile as I flipped through documents I didn't remember signing. There it was in black ink, forged initials, false notary stamps, a transfer of ownership on our home that read like a legal eulogy. Amanda had forged my name with all the casual elegance of someone who'd done it before. If she'd put half this effort into our marriage instead of burning it to the ground, we might have had a chance. By the time I reached the last page, I felt like a man reading his own obituary, and the worst part was, I didn't even recognize the name on the buyer's line. A shell company. Some LLC Amanda created months ago, funded with money siphoned from our joint accounts and a credit card I'd never even seen. I traced it to a P.O. box downtown, and from there, I found a trail that led me to a luxury condo complex across the city, one of those high-rise places with a 24-hour concierge and imported marble floors that practically scream. I never worked a day in my life. I parked across the street and waited in my truck, watching through binoculars like I was back on recon, and sure enough, not 2 hours later, Amanda strutted out of the lobby in heels that probably cost more than my entire deployment bonus. She looked younger, richer, colder, like war had never touched her, like I'd never existed. And draped around her arm was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne ad. Perfect hair, tailored suit, and the smug kind of smile that made my fist clench on instinct. But I didn't move. I didn't charge across the street or scream her name. I sat there and swallowed the fury because I knew now that this wasn't just infidelity, this was warfare by other means. Amanda hadn't just fallen out of love with me. She'd strategized, premeditated, executed. And somewhere in the middle of all that deceit, she'd lost my son. That's when I called Richard, the only man who knew how to navigate both the battlefield and the chaos of civilian life, and when he answered on the second ring with that low, steady voice of his, I said 7 words I hadn't spoken since my last mission. I need intel. And I need it fast. If you've never stared into the eyes of the woman who once held your son on her chest just minutes after he was born, who cried tears of joy and swore she'd never hurt either of you, only to realize that same woman is now smiling like a damn movie villain while your life burns in the background, then let me tell you something straight. There's no battlefield in the world more brutal than betrayal delivered with a smirk. I didn't plan on confronting Amanda that day, I swear I didn't. But after watching her float around in heels that weren't made for mothers and a dress you don't wear unless you want attention from someone who doesn't know your last name, something in me snapped. I followed her. Not like a maniac, not like a husband chasing his wife, no. I followed her like a soldier hunting the source of a threat. And when she stepped into that high-rise condo, dripping in designer accessories I didn't recognize and trailing the scent of betrayal behind her like expensive perfume, I made a decision. I was going to look her in the eye. And I was going to find out what she did with my boy. I don't know what I expected when she opened the door, but it sure as hell wasn't what I saw. Amanda looked polished. Not just made up, refined. Her expression flickered when she recognized me, but it wasn't fear or regret or guilt. It was annoyance, like I'd interrupted her spa day. Behind her, lounging on the leather sectional I likely paid for, was the man I'd seen earlier, the one with the expensive haircut and the skin that had never seen a day of hard work. Amanda didn't even pretend to be ashamed. She leaned against the doorframe like a woman perfectly at peace with her treachery and asked, I kid you not, if I wanted something. I asked where Jacob was. Her smile faded only slightly, enough for me to see a shadow pass across her face, like she'd forgotten I was still a father. Jacob's fine, she said, too quickly. He's figuring things out. That's when the man behind her, clearly amused by the entire exchange, chuckled and added, Kids got to grow up sometime. Right? That laugh, God help me, I'll never forget that laugh. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was invasive, like he was trespassing inside something sacred and mocking the damage. I stepped forward, not to hit him, not yet, but to make it clear that whatever this game was, it was over. Amanda blocked me with one hand and dropped the bomb without blinking. You're not Jacob's legal guardian anymore. I had the papers changed. He's 17. He's free to make his own choices. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might shatter. Choices? What kind of choices was she talking about? Where was he living? Who was he with? Was he safe? She wouldn't answer. Just said I needed to move on. That I was too intense. That war changed me. And I'll admit, she was right about one thing. War did change me. But it didn't break me. It trained me. It taught me how to be patient. How to observe. How to strike when the enemy gets too comfortable. And after seeing Amanda like that, smug, secure, and surrounded by stolen luxury, I realized something crystal clear. She thought the war was over. She had no idea it had just begun. There's a different kind of fear that sets in when you realize your child isn't just missing, they're being used. Not gone, not hiding, not rebellious, but leveraged like a pawn in someone else's twisted game. That's the sickening truth Richard hit me with after 2 days of digging. He'd been quiet, methodical, and colder than I remembered, but I guess retirement does that to a man who's seen too much. When he finally called, his voice was low and tight, like every word he was about to say weighed more than the last. He'd found Jacob, or at least, he found where Jacob had been. A series of surveillance photos, some grainy footage from a pawn shop in West Colfax, and a whispered name that made my blood run cold, Torrell Bishop. A mid-level street boss tied to one of the most vicious crews in the city, not the type who recruits teenagers unless he sees potential or desperation. My son, my flesh and blood, had been seen running drops, carrying bags, hanging around with corner boys like he belonged. He was in deep. And Amanda? She knew. She let it happen. I sat in silence as Richard laid it all out, detail by detail, as if reading a eulogy for the boy I once knew. Jacob had stopped going to school months ago. He'd been crashing at a flop house in the East End, a converted apartment where young runners stayed off-grid. No driver's license. No social posts. Just ghost trails, burner phones, prepaid gas stations, cash transactions. And Amanda, in her new life of red wine and rooftop yoga, had the audacity to tell people that Jacob was figuring himself out. What she meant was she sold her soul for granite countertops and passed the bill to our son. Richard didn't say it directly, he didn't have to, but every pause in his report told me the same thing. Jacob was being exploited. He was a mule, a body, a resource. And the only reason the cops hadn't picked him up yet was because Bishop knew how to keep his kids useful without letting them get caught. But I'd seen this before in war zones, in back alleys, in villages where parents sold their own just to survive, and I wasn't about to let it happen again on my watch. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my truck across from the address Richard gave me, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight the leather creaked under my fingers. I watched that crumbling apartment building like it was an enemy compound, waiting for movement, waiting for the impossible, waiting to see my son walk out alive. And when the door finally creaked open around 3 a.m., and I saw him tall, thinner than I remembered, hoodie pulled up and eyes sunken with exhaustion, I felt something crack inside me. He didn't see me. He didn't even look up. Just walked across the street with a duffel slung over his shoulder like it weighed more than he did. I wanted to run to him, to grab him, to tell him everything would be okay. But I didn't. Because what I saw in that moment wasn't just my son. It was a kid who'd been abandoned, manipulated, turned into a currency for someone else's comfort. And the woman who did it still slept peacefully on Egyptian cotton sheets, dreaming about her next glass of wine. But I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was awake. I was locked in. And I was done waiting. There's a specific silence that settles into a man's bones when he realizes that the war he thought he left behind didn't end. It just changed location. Mine wasn't in a foreign country anymore. It was sitting in a crumbling apartment across town, hiding in alleyways, crouched in the back seats of stolen cars, and it wore my son's face. I spent the next 3 days mapping every exit, every pattern, every contact Jacob made like I was preparing for an ambush. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I just watched and recorded, my fingers twitching with the same muscle memory I used overseas to plan extractions in hostile territory. But this was different. This wasn't some soldier I was trying to save. This was my boy. And the enemy? It wasn't just the gang. It was Amanda, the woman who looked me in the eye, told me to move on, and then let our son get swallowed by the streets while she sipped Chardonnay on her rooftop like a queen watching her empire rot. By the fourth night, I felt the rage morph into something colder, sharper, a focus that I hadn't tapped into since my last deployment. That's when I drove out to the edge of town to see Richard, who was staying in a borrowed trailer near an abandoned quarry, a place where broken men went to fix each other with coffee, silence, and hard truths. He took one look at me and didn't ask a thing. Just handed me a black notebook, a burner phone, and a sidearm with the serial number filed down. No lecture, no pep talk. We both knew what this was. It was time to bring Jacob home. But before I did that, I needed to make sure I didn't lose myself in the process, because saving someone from hell means you have to step into it first, and not everyone makes it back out the same. That night, over cheap whiskey and a fire that crackled like incoming fire, I told Richard everything Amanda had done, the lies, the money, the betrayal. The way she sold our son to buy herself a new life like he was just another luxury item she didn't have to clean up after. Richard let me finish. Then he looked at me, dead center, and said, "You already know what you have to do. Question is, are you willing to do it without losing your soul?" I didn't answer him. I just looked out at the horizon, that thin line where black sky meets cold dirt, and nodded. Because in that moment, I wasn't a husband. I wasn't even a soldier. I was a father. And the thing about fathers is, when you take away everything, the house, the money, the marriage, but leave the fire that keeps them alive, that's when you see what real war looks like. And Amanda, whether she knew it or not, had just declared it. There's a moment just before an operation, back when I was deployed, where the world holds its breath and your heartbeat slows down not out of calm, but out of pure, calculated focus, like your body knows chaos is coming and starts to prepare your soul. That's exactly how I felt as I crouched in the alley across from the trap house where my son had been stashed like a disposable asset, running poison to strangers while his mother played house with her boyfriend in a condo built on blood money. This wasn't going to be a rescue with cops and flashing lights, no dramatic takedown, no sirens to make her look like the villain she really was. No, this was going to be surgical, personal, and fast. I waited for hours, tracking every figure that came and went, and when Jacob finally emerged, shoulders slouched, hoodie up, stumbling like a shadow of the boy I raised, I knew it was time to act. I followed in 2 blocks, my hands trembling not from nerves, but because I didn't know if he would recognize me, or if the streets had fully erased his memory of who I was. I didn't grab him at first. I called his name. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough for his ears to catch it through the noise in his head. He stopped, mid-step, like the air had been knocked from his lungs. He turned around slowly, and for one terrifying second, I didn't see recognition in his eyes, only fear, like I was another threat. But then his face broke, not into a smile, but into something worse, the kind of look a kid gives when hope hurts more than pain, when you've been let down so many times that believing in anything, even your own father, feels dangerous. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just stood there as I walked to him and placed a hand on his shoulder like I was defusing a bomb. I told him I was here now, that I knew everything, and that none of it, not Amanda, not the crew, not the things he'd done, could change the fact that I was his father, and I would burn the whole city down before I let him disappear again. He didn't cry, but his knees buckled and he leaned into me like a soldier too wounded to walk alone, and I knew in that instant I wasn't rescuing my son. I was dragging him out of a war he never should have been drafted into. We stayed in a motel 2 towns over, under fake names, with blackout curtains and burner phones and silence so thick you could hear the weight of it drop between us. Jacob barely spoke for the first 24 hours, curled into himself on the far side of the bed like a prisoner waiting for someone to scream. But when he did finally open up, in the middle of the second night, voice cracking, eyes rimmed red, what he told me made my hands go numb. Amanda had known about Bishop. She introduced them, said it was temporary, just a way to earn, and she promised she'd take care of things while he figured himself out. My ex-wife hadn't just failed our son. She had sold him. And as Jacob fell asleep beside me, exhausted from truth and guilt, I stared at the ceiling with a kind of clarity that doesn't fade. Because now I knew I hadn't just come back from one war. I'd come back to fight this one. And this time, I wasn't going to play nice. If you've ever fantasized about revenge, not the Hollywood kind with explosions and guns blazing, but the kind where justice comes in through the front door wearing a badge and a warrant, then you'll understand the deep, almost sacred satisfaction I felt the morning Amanda's new life came crashing down around her like a glass house under artillery fire. I spent the week after rescuing Jacob doing what I do best, gathering intelligence, connecting dots, and planning moves 3 steps ahead. With help from Richard and an old contact of mine who owed me a favor from back in the Army intelligence world, I assembled a file that would make any federal prosecutor sweat with excitement. Wire transfers from Bishop's shell companies to Amanda's personal account. Real estate purchased with laundered cash. A fraudulent power of attorney she used to steal my signature and sell our house while I was overseas. And then the smoking gun, a series of encrypted messages between her and Bishop himself, detailing Jacob's contributions and promising bigger payouts if he stayed off the radar. What she did wasn't just cruel. It was criminal. I delivered everything in person to the detective working organized crime out of the city's major crimes unit, a woman named Sergeant Dana Cruz, who stared at the file for a full 5 minutes before looking up and asking me one simple question. Do you want her arrested at home or somewhere public? I didn't hesitate. Public, I said. She likes attention. Let's give her some. 2 days later, I stood across the street from the same rooftop wine bar where Amanda had once laughed in my face and told me I needed to move on. I watched as 2 plainclothes officers moved in, one from the entrance, one from the elevator, and I swear, I'll remember her expression for the rest of my life. She had just lifted her glass when the badge came out. That perfect little smirk she wore cracked like cheap porcelain the second they cuffed her in front of half the city's wealthiest parasites, dragging her away in heels that cost more than my first truck. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, as the woman who dismantled our family one lie at a time got walked out like trash on collection day. Of course, she screamed. Of course, she cried. The local paper got pictures. The news ran a segment. Her face, once airbrushed in every PDA yearbook and condo board newsletter, was now plastered beside words like fraud, money laundering, and child endangerment. Jacob didn't say much when I showed him the headline. He just nodded once and whispered, "Good." And that was enough. Because Amanda didn't just lose her freedom that day. She lost her image, her standing, her fake life of curated brunches and boutique lies. She was exposed. And the thing about people like Amanda is, once the mask slips, there's no putting it back on. Not when the world finally sees what kind of monster you've been behind the makeup. And as far as I was concerned, it was about damn time the world looked. There's a kind of quiet that settles over a courtroom just before a verdict is read, not the respectful hush you'd hear at a funeral or the stillness before a wedding vow, but something different entirely, something thick and suffocating. Like the moment before a bomb goes off when everyone knows something is about to change forever. I sat at that wooden bench in a stiff suit I hadn't worn since my promotion ceremony 6 years ago, staring across the aisle at a woman I used to wake up next to, who now couldn't meet my eyes. Amanda looked smaller than I remembered, not just in stature, but in spirit, like the weight of every lie, every betrayal, every stolen dollar had finally begun to settle into her bones. Her makeup couldn't hide the bags under her eyes or the way her hands trembled as her lawyer whispered one last desperate strategy into her ear. But there were no more moves left to make. The evidence spoke for itself, and when the prosecution laid it all out, the bank records, the fraudulent documents, the text threads about Jacob like he was some package to be delivered, I watched the jury flinch like they'd been punched. One woman openly wiped away tears. The judge didn't even blink. And for once, Amanda had nothing left to say. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't even glance her way when the bailiff cuffed her wrists after the sentence was read. 10 years minimum. 3 for fraud, 5 for money laundering, and 2 more tacked on for child endangerment. And while some might say that wasn't enough, that she deserved more time, more suffering, more public humiliation, I didn't feel the need for excess. Because sometimes, justice isn't about revenge. It's about watching the truth finally take root and crack through the concrete lies someone spent years building. And for Amanda, the worst part wasn't the sentence. It was the silence that followed, the realization that no one was coming to save her. Not her friends, who had ghosted her the moment her mugshot hit the news. Not Nick, who'd vanished like the coward he was the second the heat turned up. And certainly not Jacob, who sat beside me with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, refusing to look at the woman who once kissed him goodnight while plotting to use him like a pawn in her twisted little empire. After court, Jacob and I walked out into the sunlight, real sunlight, not the kind filtered through prison glass or cheap motel blinds, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough to know that something had shifted. We weren't healed, not yet, but we were free. Amanda's chapter in our lives was over, sealed with a courtroom stamp and a prison ID number. I looked at my son, taller now, quieter, older in ways no teenager should be, and I knew this fight hadn't been just for me. It had been for him, for his future, for every part of him that Amanda tried to exploit and twist into something unrecognizable. And as we got in the truck and pulled away from that courthouse for the last time, I didn't look back, because I didn't need to. That part of our story was behind us, broken, buried, and finally, blessedly finished. It's strange how quiet redemption can be, not the kind that comes with applause or a movie ending, but the kind that arrives on a cool spring morning, when the sky is just starting to stretch open and the smell of pine hits you like a memory you didn't realize you'd been missing. That's what it felt like the day Jacob and I moved into the cabin. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, with stove, just enough space to breathe without being reminded of everything we've lost. We built it ourselves, plank by plank, through sweat and silence and more than a few splinters. But there was healing in that silence, in the sound of nails driven deep into fresh lumber, in the smell of sawdust and the ache of sore shoulders. I caught Jacob smiling once, really smiling, when he tightened a bolt on the porch railing and stood back like he was proud of something that didn't involve running or hiding. That's when I knew we were going to be okay. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But we'd finally stopped bleeding. And for the first time in a long time, we weren't looking over our shoulders. Amanda sent a letter. Just one. Handwritten, no return address. I found it stuffed between 2 bills in the mailbox about a month after the trial. I didn't open it. Still haven't. It sits on the kitchen shelf, sealed in its original envelope, aging under a coffee mug I don't use anymore. I don't need her explanations. I don't need her apologies. There's nothing she could write that would undo what she did, the house she sold, the lies she lived, or the way she fed our son to wolves just so she could keep sipping wine while the world around her burned. And yet, I don't hate her. I don't wish her pain. Because the worst punishment for someone like Amanda isn't prison. It's being forgotten. It's knowing that the people you tried to destroy are still standing, still laughing, still living, without you. I don't think she ever expected me to come out of this stronger. I think she truly believed I'd break, fade, disappear into the ruins she left behind. But that's the thing about combat vets, we don't fold. We rebuild. Now, every morning, I wake up early, pour a cup of black coffee, and step out onto the porch Jacob and I built with our bare hands. The view isn't dramatic. No oceans, no mountains, just a stretch of tall grass and a horizon that finally feels like it belongs to us. Jacob's working with a local veterans outreach now, helping other kids who've seen too much, too young. I catch him watching the road sometimes, like he's still waiting for the past to follow us here, but then he turns back to the fire pit or the garden and keeps moving forward. That's all we can do now. Move forward. And if you'd told me a year ago that peace would come not from revenge, not from courtrooms or prison bars, but from the simple act of starting over with my son by my side, I would have called you a liar. But here we are. Free. Together. And when I breathe in the stillness and hear the wind brushing through the trees, I know without a shadow of a doubt, we won.